like to begin today with what I would call a thought experiment. I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you are a parent of two teenage boys, okay? I want you to imagine you have two teenage boys, and one day you sit your whole family down on the couch to deliver some really dreadful news. You tell your family that you have been visiting a whole bunch of different doctors. They've run a whole battery of medical tests. And the bottom line, they say, is that you have less than 2 weeks to live. Now, upon delivering that news to your family, immediately your two teenagers begin to argue and fight with each other about which one of them is going to get your car when you die. They're practically tripping over each other, asking to be trying to be the first one to get permission from you to have your car when you're dead. Now, how would you feel about that? Would that hurt? You bet it would hurt. Why? Because you just told your children that you were going to be dead soon, and all they can think to do is to leverage their relationship with you now to get more stuff from you later. This request isn't just bad timing. It's incredibly selfish. It displays an utter disregard for you, a lack of concern, a lack of love. Well, it's hard to imagine something like that happening in real life, isn't it? It's surely nobody would be so callous and so insensitive as to say or do something like that. Well, actually, something like that did happen in real life. It happened to Jesus, or something similar. It happened in today's passage. In the passage we just read a moment ago, if you were to back up just a few verses from there, we find that Jesus and his disciples are on a trip. They're on a journey to Jerusalem. And a few verses before this, Jesus tells them why. He predicts the future. He says, we're going to Jerusalem, and when we get there, I'm going to be betrayed. Then I'll be arrested. Then we'll be put on trial. I'm going to be condemned. I will be mocked, humiliated, flogged, and ultimately crucified. And how do the disciples respond to this shocking revelation? Well, in verse 37, we see two of them at least, James and John, say this: before you do, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory. Now understand, these are the highest positions possible in the kingdom. The one on the right of the king and the one on the left of the king. High, high positions of honor. So get the context here. Jesus has just informed his disciples that he's terminal. And James and John take the opportunity to ask him for a promotion, attempting to secure positions of power for themselves. It's a brazen act of shameless self-promotion at the expense of their beloved master, teacher, and friend. Do you think that hurt Jesus' feelings? I'm guessing it did. And yet, see how Jesus responds to them. He graciously and patiently instructs them about the nature of greatness in this kingdom that he has come to establish. He begins to teach them. Lesson number 1. Position always has a price. Position always has a price. See, when you and I look at a person who's in a very high position, prominent position, we have a tendency to envy that person. Why? Because of the privilege that goes with the position. It's easy to see, isn't it? It's obvious for all of us that the privileges that go with that kind of position. What we often don't see is the price. For example, take something as simple as a restaurant, a popular, successful restaurant. The owner of that restaurant, we see the owner of that restaurant, we see a man who is popular, we see a man who is perhaps prestigious, even prosperous. What you really don't see is a man who works 90 plus hours every week. You don't see a man who rarely sees his family. You don't see a business owner whose business owns him. hard to see the price. Or take, for example, a prominent politician. We can look at a famous politician. We say, hey, there's a man who's famous, a man who's wealthy, a man who is powerful. Maybe envy that. But what you don't see is what it cost him to rise to that level of office. What you don't see is the intense external and internal pressures that he endures. You perhaps don't see the moral dilemmas and the impossibly difficult decisions that he faces regularly. You probably don't see the unfair blame and the misplaced vitriol leveled against him by uninformed constituents. It's easy to see the privilege, isn't it? It's obvious, it's external, it's clear, it's attractive. It's very difficult to see the price. Position always has a price. And often the higher the position, the higher the price. Jesus is talking about this general concept, and in particular about him and about them. In verse 38, the disciples have just said, Jesus, we want the highest positions of prominence in your kingdom. We want to sit on your right and on your left. And Jesus responds in verse 38, you don't know what you're asking. You don't know what you're asking. He's essentially saying, you're blinded by your own ambition. You see position. That's all you see. All you see is prosperity. You see prestige, possessions, power. All you can see is privilege. But you're not seeing the price. Verse 38, he asked them this, can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? Now, what is it? Is Jesus just talking in riddles here? Is cups and baptism? What does that mean? Jesus is referring to his suffering and his death. He's using these as metaphors. The word cup, he uses this in other places. For example, on the night before he died, if you recall, as he prayed in the garden in Mark chapter 14, he says, Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. But not as I will, but as you will. Cup, in this case, is a metaphor for his death. Jesus doesn't want to die.